mouse, once upon a time, who decided that she was going to teach her children all about the world. And so she gathered all of her little mice together, and they went out for a walk. And they came out into the house where they were at, and they walked down the hallway, and they turned right, and they walked down another hallway, and then they turned left, and they suddenly found themselves in front of the family cat, who was dozing there in the sunlight. Now, you can imagine how the mother mouse felt. She was very scared, but she didn't want her children, her little mice, to know that. And so she signaled her children to be very quiet and to follow her as she began to tiptoe quietly past the sleeping cat. And just as she was about to get past the cat's eyes popped open, and he started to raise a paw. Now, the little mice were very scared. What was their mother going to do? Well, just as the cat's paw started to come down, that mother cat looked the cat right in the eye, and she barked just like a dog. And the cat ran away. He was so surprised. And so the mother mouse wiped her brow, and she shook just a little bit, and then she turned to her children, and she said, "Children, I hope that you have learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes it's good to know a second language." It's the same way with us, isn't it? It's good for us to know a second language, especially when that second language is the language of God. And light is the language of God, the language of grace, the language of love, and the language of hope. And when this language of God is translated into action, it becomes the most beautiful language that has ever been spoken. We are called to be light. We are called to speak the language of God as we live out our faith. We are called to live the Word. Now, if you live here in Manhattan and you've ever driven down Kimball Avenue and you're coming towards the church from the west, you might have noticed that it's very dark at this intersection here. And even if you know that you're going to turn into the church, it's really hard sometimes to see the road that you're going to turn on. What we need is a big street light right there, but it's probably not going to happen. And so a few years ago, there's one of those AT&T post things out there in the ground. And so I took some reflective tape a few years ago, and I put it on there, several bands of it, so that as you drove up, at least from the west, that you would be able to see the light reflecting off of that, and you would know that this was the place that you could turn. Now, that reflective tape is useless during the daytime. It's useless, in fact, unless there's light that's shining on it, and then it can reflect off, and it can tell you that it's there. Now, I looked, and there's really not much tape left on there. It was a few years I put it on there, so I think it's probably time to maybe add some more tape there. When Jesus said to his disciples that you are the light of the world, what he meant really was they are reflectors of the light of God. Just like your car lights are the light source for those strips that I put on out there, we are the reflection of God's light. God is the illuminating source. God is where the light comes from, and we reflect that light. And God needs us to be those reflectors. God needs us to be the reflection of his love in the world so that others can see by that light of Christ. You know, at home, you probably do too, we have a lot of flashlights. And they have different means of providing light. Some of them have a light bulb in them. Some of them have an LED in them, a light-emitting diode. And some of them have a fluorescent tube. But they all have one thing in common. Every single one of them, behind the bulb, has a reflector so that the light leaves the flashlight and goes out where it needs to be. The bulb produces the light, but the reflector directs it out where we want it to shine. For us, God provides the light, and we are the reflectors. You know, without the sun, the moon would never shine because it's merely reflecting the light from the sun. Well, back I was working on something on the back of our television set that we have downstairs in the basement. It's mounted up on the wall, and it's a sort of a heavy set, and I didn't really want to take it down. So I took a mirror, and I shined a flashlight on the mirror, and the light bounced off of there and hit the back of the TV where I needed to see, and I was able to see what I needed to see there to take care of it. As Christians, that's what we're called to do. We are called to reflect God's light, not simply to reflect it, but to reflect it in those dark places where light needs to shine. In those dark places, those places like the loneliness that a neighbor might experience when a parent or a spouse dies. Those dark places like when a friend is tempted to use drugs by another so-called friend. Those dark places when a wife finds out that her husband has been cheating on her. Those dark places like when you find out that the job that you had been counting on for your future is being eliminated and there won't be another one to replace it. Those dark places that we all have in our lives. Christians reflect God's light and God's love into those dark places. And if we are the reflection of God's light and God's love, then shouldn't people be able to see something when they look at us? Shouldn't it make a difference when they look at us if we are the reflection of that loving and caring and grace-filled light of God? I told some of you this a few years ago. I think you've heard it. We used to live in Liberal, Kansas, down in the southwest corner of the state, and it's very windy down there. And I remember walking one of the streets one day, and the sun is like here, it's very bright on some days. And so I was walking on this busy street, and I was walking into the sun, and I noticed that as people were coming up towards me, they were smiling. Most of the people in the cars would smile at me. And I came to realize that I was squinting because the sun was shining on me, and my squint must have looked like a smile, and so people were smiling back. And when they started smiling back at me, I started smiling because they were smiling. But it all started from a squint. It was kind of nice. When you smile at other people, what happens? Probably you get a smile back. So even if you didn't feel that smile when you were smiling at them, and they smile back at you, you might start to smile too. And then all of a sudden the world is a little bit brighter. That's that light of Christ that we are able to shine out into other people's lives. And so the question that I want us to think about today is, what do people see when they look at you? What do they see in you? If you are reflecting God's light and God's grace and God's care, what do they see when they look in your face? Or another way to look at it, I guess, is what are people reflecting back at you that they see? Is everybody that you look at frowning? Maybe there's a reason. Maybe I am the reason that they're frowning. What is it that they see at us? Do they see God? Do we need to change? Do we need to think about that? If we are the reflection of God's love, do we need to think about what it is that we are actually reflecting? Because it could start out as a squint and it could end up as a smile, and you all feel better. It's amazing what God can do if we put a little bit of effort into it. Jesus said, "You are the light of the world." He was talking to his disciples, but he was talking to us also, because we are his disciples also. We are his followers. You and me, we are the light of the world. And if we are the light of the world, then we have a responsibility for that light to shine so that others can see. So that others can see Christ through us, so that they will see what we do because we follow Christ, and they will be able to better see Christ in their lives. You are the light of the world. Let your light so shine before others that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Amen.